He built an empire on loyalty. He bled for it, sacrificed for it, gave everything he had to the one person he trusted above all others. Then one Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang, and the man who made grown men beg for mercy stood frozen in a parking garage, listening to his wife laugh about destroying him. Vincent Callahan thought he knew what betrayal felt like. He had no idea. This is the story of a mafia boss who lost everything in a single phone call, and then made sure the people who took it from him lost far more. If this story hits different, hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Bad. The call came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Vincent Callahan was standing in the lower level of the Cascade parking structure on 4th Avenue, 3 floors below street level, the kind of place that smelled like exhaust and concrete dust and other people's bad days. He just dropped his phone into the inside pocket of his jacket after sending a brief text to his operations manager, Dario, something about a delayed shipment coming through the port of Tacoma that needed quiet handling before Thursday. Standard business, the kind of thing that used to require meetings and hushed phone calls in back rooms, but now got handled in 14 words between 2 men who didn't need to explain themselves to each other. He was reaching for his car keys when the phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it right away. He was thinking about the shipment, thinking about Thursday, thinking about whether the new arrangement with the Harmon brothers out of Portland was going to hold, or whether he was going to have to drive up there himself and have a conversation that nobody wanted to have. He fished out the keys, pressed the fob, heard the soft double click of his Range Rover unlocking 20 feet ahead of him in the dim fluorescent light. Then he glanced down at the screen. Madison. He almost smiled. She'd been on edge lately. He'd noticed that, even if he hadn't said anything, quiet at dinner, distracted in the mornings. He'd chalked it up to the renovation stress, the kitchen project that had been dragging on for 4 months. She'd been talking about flying to San Francisco to see her friend Dana this weekend, and he told her to go ahead, take the company card, enjoy herself. He was going to be tied up with the Portland situation anyway. He answered the call the way he always answered her calls. No performance to it, just, hey. Nothing. Not silence, exactly. There was ambient sound on the other end, the soft clatter of dishes somewhere, the low hum of what might have been a television or music. He could hear breathing, shallow, easy, unguarded. Someone who had no idea anyone was listening. Madison, he said again, louder this time. Still nothing. Pocket dial. He understood immediately. She'd called him by accident, phone loose in a bag or a coat, and she had no idea the line was open. He'd done it himself once or twice, called Dario from his front pocket while sitting through a dinner, heard the man's confused voice through the fabric 20 seconds later. He almost hung up. He doesn't know why he didn't. He would ask himself that question many times in the months that followed, turning it over and over like a stone he couldn't put down. Maybe it was instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 22 arrests, 3 acquittals, 1 mistrial, and more situations than he could count where the difference between walking away and not walking away had been his ability to read a room, read a moment, read the thing beneath the thing. Maybe it was just bad luck. Maybe the universe decided he'd been comfortable for long enough. He stood next to his car in that gray underground parking structure, and he listened. For 30 seconds, there was nothing but that ambient sound. Then a door somewhere. Footsteps on a hard floor. And then Madison's voice, unmistakable. That particular register she had when she was relaxed and animated and talking to someone she felt completely safe with. He thinks I'm in Pilates, she said, and laughed. Not a small laugh. A real one. The kind that came from somewhere genuine. Vincent went very still. You're terrible, a man's voice said. Low, easy, the voice of someone who found everything a little amusing. You know that? I know, Madison said. I don't even feel bad about it anymore. Is that bad? That's evolution, baby. More laughter. The sound of something being set down on a counter. Glass on marble. The specific sound of her kitchen. He recognized it without knowing why. He called this morning, Madison said, while I was literally in your parking garage. I had to stand there and listen to him tell me about some dinner next week with his boring business contacts, and I was like, a pause. A sound he knew was her leaning against something, shifting her weight. I don't care. I don't care anymore, Brad. I'm done pretending I care. Brad. Vincent turned the name over once. He didn't know anyone named Brad. That was the first thing. The absence, the gap, the simple fact that his wife was saying a name like it was the most familiar word in her vocabulary, and he had no frame for it. "So when?" the man said. "I told you. I need to wait for the right moment. These things have to be handled correctly, or the whole thing falls apart." "You've been saying that for 3 months." "Because it's been complicated for 3 months." Her voice shifted. A little sharper now, the way it got when she felt defensive. Vincent had heard that shift 1,000 times, usually directed at him. "You don't understand what he's like. He's not some—" She stopped, chose her words. "He's not a normal situation." "You think he'll fight it?" "I think he thinks I love him," Madison said, and her voice dropped into something that was almost gentle, the way a person's voice gets when they're describing something they find a little sad. "He's been good to me. He genuinely has. But he doesn't see me. He never has. He sees this version of me that exists in his head. This, I don't know, his wife, the woman in his house. He's been so busy building whatever it is he's building that he doesn't realize I've been somewhere else for a long time." "How long?" A pause. A genuine one. "Longer than 7 months, she said. 7 months is just when you finally came to your senses. When I finally did something about it." Another small laugh, but this one had edges. "I've been miserable for 2 years, Brad. 2 years of waiting for something to change and watching it not change and smiling at dinners with people I don't like and being the right accessory for the right occasions. And I just—" Her voice cracked just slightly. "Not grief. Something else. Something that sounded more like frustration finally finding an exit. I want my life. I want to actually live it. With you." Vincent was sitting in his car by this point. He didn't remember getting in. He was sitting in the driver's seat with the door closed and the phone pressed against his ear, and he was very, very still. He was good at still. It was one of his things, one of the qualities that men in his organization understood about him without needing to be told, that when things got bad, Vincent Callahan got quieter. Not colder, exactly. Quieter. Like a body of water in winter, the surface going smooth and flat and unreadable just before it froze. He was listening to his wife tell another man she wanted to live her life with him, and he was very still, and somewhere beneath the stillness there was a thing moving that he couldn't name and didn't want to look at directly. "The settlement?" Bradley said. "You talked to the guy in Bellevue?" "Keating, yeah. We had coffee Thursday." "And?" "He said with the asset disclosure laws in this state, if I document everything carefully—" A pause while she shifted somewhere, the subtle acoustics of the kitchen changing. "He thinks we're looking at 40% of disclosed assets minimum. Could be higher depending on what surfaces in discovery." "Disclosed assets," Bradley said, and his voice had a careful quality to it now. "Right. I have no idea what actually runs through his organization. Obviously. But what he can document legitimately, what's on paper, what the accountants know about—" She paused again. "It's a lot, Brad. I've lived in that world for 6 years. It's substantial. Enough that I wouldn't need to work for a long time," Madison said, and her voice had gone somewhere new, flat, practical. The voice she used for logistics, for planning, for the particular focus she brought to things she cared about. "Enough that we could go wherever we wanted, do whatever we wanted. I just need the timing to be right." Define right. "I need him to believe everything is fine until I'm ready to file. The moment he suspects anything, he'll start moving things, shifting accounts, doing whatever he does with money when he needs to protect it." "The man is not stupid, Brad. Whatever he is, he's not stupid. So I need him in the dark until the papers are filed and the discovery period starts and everything is locked." 40 minutes. Vincent sat in that car for 40 minutes. He didn't move much. His hands rested on the steering wheel, and he listened, and the call went on, drifting from the logistics of the divorce to smaller things, domestic things, the kind of conversation two people have when they're comfortable and unhurried. Bradley mentioned something about a conference in Portland. Madison mentioned the renovation, laughed about how Vincent thought she was actually stressed about the renovation, said something about the contractor that made Bradley laugh in a way Vincent didn't like, rich and possessive and easy. At one point she said, I almost feel sorry for him sometimes. Bradley said, Don't. I know. It's just a long exhale. He's been loyal to me. That's the thing. Whatever else you want to say about him and the life he lives and the people he deals with, he has been completely loyal to me this entire time. He is incapable of the kind of thing I've been. It's not in him. That's not virtue, Bradley said. That's limitation. A beat of silence. Yeah, Madison said. Yeah, you're right. Vincent ended the call. He sat there for another minute with the phone face down on the passenger seat. His breathing was controlled. It was always controlled. That was something he'd worked on for 20 years. The ability to keep his respiratory rate steady when everything else was burning, because the moment your breathing changed was the moment the people watching you knew something had shifted. He'd taught younger men in his organization this principle. He'd said it 100 times. The most dangerous thing you can do in a crisis is let your body announce it. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. He was 34 years old. He had run a criminal organization with 300 active affiliates across the Pacific Northwest for the last 7 years, taking over from his uncle Dominic at 27, when Dominic had a stroke that left him unable to do more than sit in a garden in Bellevue and watch the roses. He had made decisions that destroyed men's careers, men's freedom, occasionally more than that. He had sat across from federal prosecutors and looked them in the eye and said nothing for 6 hours. He had been the last person standing in more situations than he cared to count. He was not prepared for this. That was the honest thing, and he sat with it. He was not prepared for the specific sensation of having the architecture of his private life dismantled in real time by the voice of the woman he had chosen above everyone else. He had trusted Madison in a way that he trusted almost no one. Not because she was innocent, exactly. Not because he had illusions about what people were capable of, but because he had made a decision, a deliberate choice to give her the part of himself that he kept away from everything else. She was outside the life. That was how he'd thought about it. Whatever happened in the organization, whatever Dario reported to him, whatever quiet conversations happened in back rooms, when he went home, he was a different kind of man. He'd worked at that. He had genuinely worked at it. He turned the key in the ignition. He drove home. The house was a 6,000 square foot Craftsman on a private lot overlooking Lake Washington. Madison had chosen it, had fallen in love with it on their first walkthrough, had stood at the back window looking at the water and said, "This one, Vincent, this is the one." He'd bought it without negotiating the price because the look on her face was worth the extra $120,000. He had thought, standing there watching her watch the water, that he understood something about his life that he hadn't understood before. He pulled into the driveway at 4:45 p.m. He sat in the car for a moment, then he went inside. Madison was in the kitchen. Of course she was. She'd been in the kitchen, standing at the island with a glass of white wine, wearing the gray cashmere sweater she'd bought in Vancouver last spring. She looked up when he came in, and her face did the thing it always did, a kind of soft opening, the smile that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth, the particular expression that had been his private reference point for years, the thing that meant home in some vocabulary he'd never had words for. "Hey," she said, "you're early. I thought you had the Portland thing." "Postponed," he said. He went to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there looking at the contents without seeing them. "Are you hungry? I was going to make pasta, or we could order—" "Pasta is fine." He heard her set down her wine glass, heard the small silence that followed. "You okay?" "Long day," he said. He wasn't ready. That was the fact of it. He wasn't ready to have the conversation. Not yet, not tonight. Not standing in the kitchen with her in that gray sweater and her hair down and the renovation dust still on the countertop from this morning. He needed to think. He needed to think clearly and completely, and without the noise of his own reaction getting in the way, because the worst thing he could do right now was react. He'd built his life on that principle. The man who reacts has already lost. "You sure?" Madison asked. There was something in her voice, a careful quality, attentiveness. The particular attentiveness of someone who was afraid they'd been caught but didn't know yet whether they had. He turned from the refrigerator. He looked at her directly, the way he always looked at people when he wanted them to understand he was actually looking, not just performing looking. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sure." She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then her eyes dropped, just slightly, a fraction, the kind of tell that only mattered if you were watching for it. Then she reached for her wine glass, and the moment passed, and they moved into the ordinary machinery of a weeknight evening in a way that felt, from the outside, completely normal. He helped her with dinner. He set the table. He asked her about her day, and she told him about it, carefully, with the ease of someone who had been practicing. And he listened to every word she said and measured each one against what he knew now, and found the seams in all of it, the small places where the performance showed its stitches. She was good. He had to give her that. She was genuinely good at this. After dinner, he told her he had calls to make, went to his study, and closed the door. He sat at his desk for a long time without making any calls. Then he picked up his phone and navigated to his contacts and found the name he was looking for. Victoria Sinclair. He'd been referred to Victoria 2 years ago by an attorney named Harmon in the context of a business dispute that had since been resolved, and he'd kept her number because he kept numbers the way some men collected debts. Against the day when the accounting came due, Victoria Sinclair was, by general consensus of anyone who'd faced her in a courtroom, the most effective divorce attorney on the West Coast. She charged more per hour than most men made in a week, had a waiting list that ran 6 months long, and had a particular reputation for discovering financial information that the other party had believed was well hidden. It was 11:45 at night. He called anyway. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice alert in the way of someone who kept unusual hours. "Sinclair." "My name is Vincent Callahan," he said. "I think I need your help." A brief pause. He heard her shift. Something about the quality of the silence changed, became focused. "Tell me what happened," she said. He told her. All of it. He was concise and precise and kept his voice level throughout, the way he'd give a situation report to Dario. Facts, sequence, relevant details, no editorializing. He told her about the call. He told her about Bradley. He told her about Keating and the Bellevue attorney and 40% and keeping him in the dark. He told her about the hidden assets remark, about the timeline Madison had described, about the plan to wait until everything was locked before filing. Victoria Sinclair listened without interrupting once. When he was done, she said, "You understand that the moment she knows you know, the dynamic changes completely." "Yes." "And you understand that in your particular situation, the exposure in a discovery process is something we'll need to manage carefully." "I understand." "Are there assets that aren't on paper?" "My accountant handles 4 disclosed entities," Vincent said. "There are others. I'll need to know about all of them. Specifically, I'll need to know what exists and what can be restructured before any filing date, legally, so that when discovery happens, we're presenting a complete picture that happens to look considerably different than what it looked like 6 months ago." "How long do I have?" "That depends on her timeline," Victoria said. "When she files, the financial snapshot that matters is the one at that moment. Before that moment, you're free to make entirely legal business decisions about how your holdings are structured. People restructure holdings all the time. It would be unwise, legally and practically, to make decisions that appear retaliatory after the fact. But decisions made before filing, through legitimate business channels, for legitimate business reasons." A pause. "Those are simply good financial management." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I'll be in your office tomorrow," he said. "I'll have my assistant clear 8 a.m. He hung up. He sat in his study for another hour, not moving much. He could hear Madison's footsteps overhead. She'd gone upstairs, was moving through the bedroom, the sound of a drawer opening and closing, the faint rush of water in the bathroom, then silence. He thought about her face when he'd looked at her in the kitchen. The 2-second hold before her eyes dropped. He thought about her voice in that parking garage. Easy, relaxed, talking about him to a man whose name he'd never heard in a tone that stripped 6 years down to logistics. He thought about the words she'd used when Bradley said his loyalty was limitation. Yeah, you're right. He thought about what it meant to build a life with someone, what you gave up, what you gave over. The specific vulnerability of allowing someone past all the defenses you'd built, not naively, not without understanding what you were doing, but deliberately, as an act of will, because you decided they were worth it. He'd decided Madison was worth it. He thought about that decision now, and examined it the way he'd examine any other significant error, without flinching, without the indulgence of self-pity, just clearly and completely. He'd made a decision with insufficient information. The result of that decision was a 6-year exposure that had now produced a specific set of threats. The correct response to a mistake was not grief. The correct response was adjustment. He was very good at adjustment. Upstairs, the bedroom light went out. Vincent Callahan sat in his study in the dark, and he began to plan. He started with the most immediate priority, documentation. The call itself had not been recorded. He hadn't been prepared, hadn't had the equipment running, and the phone's native recording function was something he'd never set up for his personal line. That was a gap. He needed to fill it. From tomorrow morning forward, every conversation with Madison would be documented. His phone's call recording function would be active. The study, which he'd had security wired 2 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with this, had audio capture built into the system. He would make sure it was running. If Madison had conversations in this house, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, anywhere in the structure, he would have a record. Second, financial architecture. Victoria had confirmed what he'd already understood. The window between now and Madison's filing date was the most critical interval. He needed to spend time with his primary accountant, Marcus Treadwell, within the next 48 hours. Not to hide anything. He was specific with himself about this. The distinction mattered. But to restructure what existed into forms that were both legally transparent and financially protected. There were trusts his grandfather had established in the late 1980s that had never been disclosed to Madison because she'd never asked, never shown the slightest interest in the boring granular details of how his money actually worked. He had honored that absence of interest by not forcing information on her. Now that absence was going to serve a different purpose. Third, intelligence. He needed to know about Bradley Whitmore. He needed to know the actual dimensions of what he was dealing with, not the sketch of a man he'd gotten from 40 minutes of overheard conversation, but the full profile. Who Bradley was, what he did, what he'd done, what his vulnerabilities were. Not for anything crude. He wasn't that kind of man, and he didn't do that kind of work anymore, and frankly it wasn't necessary. But knowledge was always necessary. He pulled out a small leather notebook from his desk drawer. The old habit, analog when it mattered, nothing on any device that could be subpoenaed or discovered, and began writing. He wrote for 40 minutes. When he was done, he had a list. It was concise and ordered and complete, and looking at it, he felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of a structure forming where there had been chaos. This was what he did. This was what he'd always done. When everything fell apart, he found the shape of what came next. He closed the notebook. He went upstairs. Madison was asleep, or performing sleep. He couldn't tell anymore and found he didn't particularly care. He moved quietly through the dark bedroom, changed without turning on a light, and got into bed on his side. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. In the morning, he told himself. In the morning, it starts. He was asleep within 10 minutes. Another thing he'd trained himself to do. Sleep when sleep was possible, because you never knew when it wouldn't be. You stored rest the way you stored capital, against the future. He was in Victoria Sinclair's office by 7:55 the next morning. Victoria was a compact woman in her early 50s, silver-haired, precise in the way of people who had spent decades working in systems built on imprecision and had compensated by becoming rigidly, almost aggressively organized. Her office on the 38th floor of a downtown Seattle tower had views of the Sound on one side and the Cascades on the other, and she stood at her window with a coffee when he came in and sized him up in the way of someone who had been sizing up damaged people for a long time. "You look better than I expected," she said. "Should I look worse?" "Most people do." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." They spent 2 hours going through everything. She asked questions in the precise drilling manner of a deposition. Not brutal, but relentless, each question following logically from the last, building a map. His assets, his organizational structure, his domestic arrangements, the timelines, what Madison had access to, what she didn't, what she knew, what she thought she knew, what she'd been told. Partway through the second hour, Victoria set down her pen. "You're calmer than anyone I've worked with in 23 years, she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. "Is that a problem?" "It tells me something about how you operate." Does it help or hurt you to know that? It helps me, she said. It means you won't do anything impulsive that I have to contain. She picked up her pen again. It worries me for a different reason. Tell me. People who are this controlled often don't give themselves time to process what's actually happened to them. They're so focused on the strategy that the wound festers. Vincent looked at her steadily. I'll deal with the wound later, he said. That's what they all say. Then you already know how to work with people like me. A pause. Then something shifted in her expression. Not softness, but a kind of respect that was adjacent to it. I do, she said. Let's talk about the filing. He was back in his car by 10:15. He had another meeting at 11 with Marcus Treadwell, and then the afternoon was going to be about Bradley Whitmore. He'd put the request through Dario the previous evening. Just a name, a profession, a general geographic location, and by now Dario would have had people moving. His phone rang as he pulled out of the parking structure. Madison. He looked at the screen for 2 full seconds. Then he answered. Hey, he said. Hey. Her voice was warm. Genuinely warm, or at least genuinely performed. He was going to have to stop trying to tell the difference, he thought. It no longer mattered. Are you downtown? I was thinking about lunch if you're free. I've got a full morning, he said. Should be clear by 1. 1 is perfect. That new place on First Hill? The Italian one? I'll make a reservation. Great. A short pause. You were quiet last night. Was I? You okay? Long few days, he said. Nothing that won't sort itself out. Okay. The warmth again. Practiced or real, there it was. See you at 1. He ended the call. He sat at a red light on 2nd Avenue and watched rain begin to streak the windshield in thin diagonal lines. And he thought, she has no idea. She has absolutely no idea. There was a thing that moved through him then, sharp and brief, and located somewhere behind his sternum, and he let himself acknowledge it for exactly the time it took the light to change. A grief that was not for her, not anymore, but for the version of her he'd constructed in his mind and lived beside for 6 years, the woman who wasn't her. He'd loved a story. That was the fact of it. He'd been careful and precise and unsentimental about almost every other aspect of his life, and he had loved a story, and now the story was over. The light changed. He drove. He was going to make her a reservation at the Italian place on First Hill. He was going to sit across from her and eat pasta and talk about nothing and watch her face and listen to her voice and file everything he noticed. He was going to do this for as long as necessary, for days or weeks, or however long it took for the architecture to be in place. He was going to be patient in the way he had always been patient when it mattered. And when it was time, when the moment was right and the position was correct and everything was ready, he was going to move first. He called the restaurant. He made the reservation. He did not, for the rest of the drive, think about Madison at all. He thought about the meeting with Marcus Treadwell. He thought about the trusts, the accounts, the entities. He thought about Bradley Whitmore and what Dario's people would have found by now. He thought about what it meant to build something that lasted. He thought about the rain and the road and the particular quality of light over the sound on a gray Seattle morning. The way the water went the color of old iron, the way the mountains appeared and disappeared in the clouds. He thought, I have been here before. Not this exact thing, but the sensation of the ground giving way beneath something he'd trusted. Yes, he had been here before. And he had not fallen then, and he was not going to fall now. He pulled into the parking structure beneath the Treadwell building. He turned off the ignition. He sat for 1 moment in the silence. Then he got out of the car, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the elevator like a man who had somewhere important to be. Because he did. He absolutely did. 3 days later, Dario's report on Bradley Whitmore was sitting on Vincent's desk in the study. 6 pages in a plain manila envelope, the kind of document that looked boring from the outside and wasn't. Bradley Whitmore, 41 years old. Senior partner at Whitmore Keene, Tew & Associates, a boutique firm specializing in high net worth civil litigation and corporate law. Graduate of Georgetown Law. Married to Rebecca Whitmore, née Carr, for 11 years. 1 daughter, age 7. Primary residence in Medina, the money-quiet neighborhood across the lake where technology fortunes went to be tasteful. And then the part that Vincent read twice. The firm had received a formal complaint 18 months ago from a client, a complaint that had been quietly settled, the details sealed, the woman's name redacted from everything that was visible from the outside. The investigator had found a secondary source, a paralegal who'd left the firm 14 months ago under circumstances she described in a brief recorded conversation as uncomfortable. She'd used the word pattern. She hadn't been specific beyond that, but her meaning was clear enough. There was more. A woman in Portland, a client of Bradley's from 4 years ago, a real estate dispute that had taken 18 months to resolve. The resolution had apparently involved more than professional courtesy. Her name was Lila Torres. She had a sister who talked too much at book club, and the investigator had been thorough. Vincent put the report down. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he thought about Madison's voice. The warmth in it, the certainty, the way she'd said, "I want my life. I want to actually live it, with you." And he thought about what Lila Torres and the unnamed woman at the firm and the paralegal who'd used the word pattern might want to say to Madison if Madison were ever in a position to hear them. He thought, she doesn't know what she's gotten into. He didn't feel sorry for her. He wanted to be clear with himself about that. He did not feel sorry for Madison, but he noted with the precision he brought to all observations that what she believed she was moving toward was not the thing she was actually moving toward, and that this was going to become relevant in ways she had not planned for. He put the report in the locked drawer of his desk. He had a dinner with Madison in an hour. They were going to the waterfront. Her suggestion, a restaurant they both liked, the kind of place that had good wine and a view of the ferries crossing to Bainbridge Island in the dark. She still didn't know that he knew. She still thought she was in control of the timeline. She still thought she was the one making moves. He put on his jacket. He checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked, he noted with something like detachment, completely normal, composed, undamaged. The face of a man who had not spent 3 nights reconstructing the architecture of his entire private life. He was good at this. He was exceptionally good at this. He went downstairs and found Madison in the entryway, pulling on her coat, the dark green one, her favorite, the one she'd worn the first night they'd had dinner in the city 8 years ago when they were still new and she'd laughed at everything. And he'd thought, sitting across from her in that booth, this woman is going to be important to me. She turned when she heard him on the stairs and gave him that smile. "Ready?" she said. He held her coat while she adjusted it. A small, practiced kindness. The kind of gesture that had been automatic for years and now required something more deliberate. "Ready," he said. And as they walked out into the cold Seattle evening together, side by side, his hand briefly at the small of her back, a gesture he'd made 1,000 times that now meant something entirely different, Vincent Callahan thought about the days that were coming, the quiet work already underway, the trusts, the accounts, the restructuring. Victoria Sinclair and her organized precision, the 6 pages in the locked drawer and a woman named Lila Torres, and a word, pattern. He thought about the morning, still some weeks away, when Madison Callahan would wake up and discover that the game she'd been playing so carefully and so confidently had already ended. That somewhere between the moment she'd decided to keep him in the dark and this moment now, walking through the cold air toward his car, the man she believed she had control over had quietly, completely, and irrevocably taken it back. He opened the passenger door for her. She got in. He went around to the driver's side, settled in, started the engine. "I've been thinking," Madison said, her voice light and easy beside him, "about the renovation. I want to change the countertops. The ones we picked are too similar to the floors." "Whatever you want," Vincent said. He pulled out of the driveway. The city spread ahead of them, wet and lit, the lights of downtown reflecting on the black surface of the lake. She had no idea. She had absolutely, completely no idea. And for now, just for now, that was exactly where he needed her to be. The renovation contractor's name was Pete Sorens, and he showed up at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning with 2 guys and a truck full of tile samples that Madison had specifically requested, and Vincent let them in and poured himself a second coffee and sat at the kitchen island and watched his wife move through the space like she owned it, which technically she still did. Half of it, anyway. For now. Pete was a heavy-set man in his early 40s with a broad, honest face and the careful politeness of someone who'd learned that rich people's houses were minefields of preference and implication. He spread the tile samples across the section of countertop that hadn't been demoed yet, and Madison leaned over them with her hair loose and her reading glasses on, the ones she only wore at home, and made small sounds of consideration that Vincent had heard her make 1,000 times, the sounds of a woman who took pleasure in choosing things. Vincent drank his coffee. He watched her hands move across the samples. The ring was still there, the one he'd put on her finger in a courthouse in Portland 6 years ago, because they'd both agreed that weddings were theater. A simple band, white gold, her choice. She'd worn it every day since without apparent self-consciousness. She was wearing it now while she stood in the kitchen they'd built together and discussed grout color with a man named Pete. And somewhere in the city, a lawyer named Keating had a file with her name on it, and she was discussing grout color. Vincent set down his coffee cup, quietly. "I'm going to the office," he said. Madison looked up. "Already?" "Early meeting." "You didn't mention—" "It came up last night." He picked up his keys from the hook by the door. "I'll be back by 6. She held his gaze for a moment. That assessment again. The quick, nearly invisible check she'd been running on him for the past week, trying to read the temperature of him, trying to determine whether anything had changed. He kept his face neutral, warm, even in the practiced way. "Okay," she said. "I'll probably be out this afternoon. Dana called, wants to grab coffee." "Dana." He filed that. He didn't believe her about Dana. "Have fun," he said. He left. He drove 4 blocks, pulled over on a quiet residential street, and called Dario. "She's going out this afternoon," he said when Dario picked up. "I want to know where." "The usual car?" "Whatever works. I don't need photographs. I just need a location and a duration." "Done." A pause. "The Marcus thing is sorted, by the way. He filed the restructuring papers yesterday. Everything's clean, everything's documented, everything has a legitimate reason attached to it. Victoria's been briefed. Good." "How long do you want to keep running this parallel?" Dario asked. There was no judgment in his voice. Dario never judged. It was one of the qualities Vincent valued most in him. But there was a genuine question underneath it, the question of a man who wanted to understand the strategy completely so he could execute it correctly. "Until I'm ready to file," Vincent said. "Maybe 2 weeks? Maybe less." "You're going to file first?" "Yes." Another pause. "She's going to lose her mind." "I know. You ready for that?" Vincent looked at the street ahead of him. A woman walking a dog, a kid on a bicycle. The ordinary world doing its ordinary thing. "I've been ready for a lot of things," he said. "This is just another one." He hung up and drove to the office. The office was a legitimate one. A suite on the 22nd floor of a building in South Lake Union that housed the management company overseeing Vincent's above-ground holdings, which included 3 commercial properties, a logistics firm, and a partial stake in a restaurant group. Marcus managed the financial side. A woman named Celia ran the day-to-day administrative operation with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 12 years and had long since stopped being surprised by anything. Vincent came in twice a week, reviewed what needed reviewing, made decisions, and left. It was mundane work, and he didn't dislike it. The mundane work was what kept everything else stable. This morning he sat across from Marcus Treadwell for 90 minutes and went through the restructuring line by line. Marcus was a thin man in his 60s, formerly with a major Seattle accounting firm before Vincent had hired him away at a salary that made the decision uncomplicated. He wore the same style of glasses he'd worn for 30 years, drank black tea from a thermos he brought from home, and had the particular quality of a man who had spent decades inside other people's complicated finances and had achieved a kind of Buddhist detachment from the moral dimensions of money. "The Hargrove Trust is the cleanest," Marcus said, running his pen down a column of figures. "Your grandfather established it in '87. It's been operating continuously, and Madison's name appears nowhere in the documentation. She's not a beneficiary, she's not a co-trustee, she has no legal claim. That's approximately—" He paused for the professional courtesy of appearing to double-check something he already knew. $4.2 million currently. What about the Cascade holding structure? That one needed work. Marcus folded his hands on the table. The original entity had some exposure. Not direct, but the kind of thing a forensic accountant in Discovery might flag as worth pursuing. I've restructured it through a Delaware holding company, which is standard practice for businesses of this type. And the paper trail from Madison's perspective leads to a shell with minimal declared assets. He paused. Legally and completely. And the real estate in Bend? Transferred to the Hargrove Trust last Friday. Legal, documented, documented. Marcus Treadwell as the executing accountant of record. Legitimate business reason noted as portfolio consolidation. He picked up his tea. If anyone looks, they see a man making sensible adjustments to his asset structure, which is exactly what you are. Vincent looked at the numbers on the page. What does she see? He asked. When she and Keating go through Discovery, Marcus considered this, the management company, the 3 commercial properties, the logistics firm, the restaurant stake, liquid assets, and the 2 personal accounts she knows about. He paused. It's substantial. It's genuinely substantial. She'll do well by it. But not what she was expecting, Marcus said. No. Vincent nodded. He drove back across the city at noon and parked in a garage on Pine Street and walked to a coffee shop he'd never been to before, the kind of place that was too small and too noisy to be surveilled conveniently, and sat at a corner table and waited. The man who came in 8 minutes later was named Garrett, and he worked for a private investigations firm that Vincent had used 3 times in his career for situations that required more nuance than Dario's people usually applied. Garrett was in his late 30s, unremarkable looking in the specific way of good investigators, the kind of face that you forgot 5 minutes after seeing it. He sat down, ordered nothing. Whitmore, Vincent said. Garrett put a folded piece of paper on the table between them. The woman in Portland, Lila Torres. She's willing to talk, under the right circumstances. What circumstances? She has a lawyer. He wants assurances that nothing she says will be used in a way that exposes her to liability. That's manageable. There's also the matter of why she'd want to talk at all. She's been quiet for 4 years. Garrett's voice was neutral, informational. The answer seems to be that she's aware of at least one other woman, someone more recent. She's been sitting on this for a while. Vincent absorbed this. The complaint at the firm, 18 months ago. We think so. Do we have a name? Not yet. The settlement has a genuine NDA attached to it, and the woman, whoever she is, seems to be honoring it, for now. Garrett paused. But here's the thing. Whitmore's wife knows. Not everything, but enough. She and Torres apparently have a mutual acquaintance who talked more than she should have. Rebecca Whitmore has been aware of at least the Portland situation for about 8 months. Vincent sat with this. She's still with him, he said. She's still with him. Why? Garrett gave a small shrug that wasn't indifference, but something more practical. The 7-year-old daughter, the Medina house, the firm's salary, the life. He folded his hands on the table. People make calculations. Or she's waiting, Vincent said. Garrett looked at him. Waiting for what? For someone else to do the hard part. Garrett was quiet for a moment. That's a possibility, he said. Vincent put $200 on the table, folded under a napkin. Find me a way to have a conversation with Rebecca Whitmore, he said. Not aggressive, not confrontational. A conversation between 2 people who may have interests in common. He paused. Be careful about it. Always. He walked back to his car through the lunch crowd on Pine Street, past the market and the tourists and the men selling flowers, and his phone buzzed with a text from Dario. She's at a hotel on Capitol Hill, checked in 12:08. His car is in the garage. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and kept walking. He had known this, of course. He had known it since the parking garage, since the call, since the 40 minutes of overheard conversation that had restructured everything. He had known it intellectually and processed it strategically and done everything a man of his particular temperament and training could do to reduce it to a problem with a solution. But standing on a sidewalk in the middle of Seattle on a Tuesday afternoon, knowing that his wife was in a hotel room with another man 8 blocks away, there was a moment, brief, specific, and very quiet, when the strategy fell away and there was just the fact of it. He stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk with people moving around him, and he breathed slowly and let it be what it was, just for that moment. Not a problem, not a tactical situation, not a variable in a larger equation, but simply the worst thing a person could do to someone who had trusted them. He let himself feel the full specific weight of it. The hotel, the garage, the checked-in timestamp at 12:08, 30 seconds. He gave himself 30 seconds. Then he started walking again. That was enough. He had given it what it deserved, and he would not give it more because more was what it wanted, and more was the thing that turned men into versions of themselves they couldn't recover from. He had seen it. Men in his world, men in other worlds, men who had let a betrayal hollow them out until the betrayal was the largest thing in them, more present than anything that came after. He was not going to be that. He got in his car. He was home by 5:30, sitting in the study with a glass of water and a legal pad, running numbers on the Portland property, when he heard Madison come in downstairs. The sounds of her arrival. The door, the coat, the shoes on the entryway floor, the brief silence as she oriented herself and listened for him. "Vincent?" "Study," he called. Footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, slightly flushed, which she covered by running a hand through her hair as she leaned against the frame. Her lipstick had been reapplied, but the original had worn off unevenly at the inner corners, the way it did when you'd been busy. He noted all of this in the way he noted everything, without reaction. "How was your day?" she said. "Fine, productive." "Dana says hi, by the way." She came into the room a little further, glancing at the legal pad. "What are you working on?" "Property stuff." "The Ben thing again?" "Always the Ben thing." She laughed, a short, genuine sound, and perched on the arm of the leather chair across from the desk. She had the faintly electric quality of someone who'd spent the afternoon doing something that made them feel alive, and she was trying to modulate it, bring it down to the ordinary register of a Tuesday evening at home. She was not entirely succeeding. "I was thinking dinner out," she said. "I don't feel like cooking. That Thai place?" "Sure." She stayed where she was for a moment, looking at him with something he'd learned to read as assessment, but which, he realized now, recontextualizing 6 years of similar looks, was something else. Guilt wearing the costume of concern. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Like, really quiet." "I told you, long stretch." "Is it the Portland guys?" "Partly." "You'd tell me if something was really wrong," she said, and her voice had dropped into the register of intimacy, the lower register that she'd always used when she wanted him to feel that she was truly, specifically present for him. He had responded to that register for 6 years. He had trusted it. He looked up from the legal pad. He held her eyes for a long, even moment. "Of course," he said. Something moved across her face, too fast, too small to name. She looked away first. "Okay," she said. "Tie. I'll get my shoes." She left the study. He listened to her go down the stairs. He put down his pen. He sat in the quiet of the study and felt the specific exhaustion of maintaining this, of performing the ordinary life while the clock ran down on it, of being present for the surface of things while everything underneath was in motion. He was good at it, but it had a cost, and he was paying it. His phone buzzed. "Victoria." He picked up. "I've been thinking about timing," she said, without preamble. "We could file as early as Monday." "That's faster than I expected. The restructuring is complete. The documentation is solid. Every day you wait is another day she has to decide she's ready first." A pause. "And I'll be honest with you, Vincent. The longer this runs, the greater the risk that something changes in your position. A transaction gets scrutinized at the wrong moment. Something surfaces in discovery that Marcus didn't anticipate. Right now, the picture is clean. I'd rather file into a clean picture." He was quiet for a moment. "Monday," he said. "I'll have the papers prepared by Friday. You'll review them Thursday night." "Where does she get served?" "Where would minimize confrontation and maximize your control over the narrative?" He thought about it. "Her sister lives in Bellevue. She visits Wednesday mornings most weeks. If she follows the pattern, Victoria said, she gets served at her sister's house on Wednesday morning, which means she's not in your house when she finds out. She's somewhere with family, which limits the immediate volatility. And by the time she gets back to you, she's had time to think she has a plan," Vincent said. "Yes." "Good. He hung up as Madison called from downstairs that she was ready. He put his phone in his pocket. He went downstairs. They went to the Thai place. They sat across from each other in a booth and ate pad see ew and spring rolls and talked about things that didn't matter. And Madison was charming and funny and warm, the version of herself she deployed when she wanted to be, and Vincent matched her completely. And they drove home through the wet Seattle streets, and she reached over and put her hand on his in the dark of the car in the way she'd done 100 times, and he let her. He let her. Because in 6 days she was going to wake up and discover that she had not been, and would never again be the person with the plan in this situation. And that was going to be something he needed her to be completely unprepared for. He squeezed her hand. "Good dinner," he said. "Yeah," she said, and looked out the window and smiled. He drove. On Wednesday morning at 9:47, Dario texted him 2 words. "It's done." Vincent was in the South Lake Union office when the text came in. He read it, set the phone face down on the desk, looked out the window at the gray water of Lake Union below. He'd expected to feel something cleaner, the satisfaction of a move executed correctly, the particular relief of action following preparation. He felt those things. But there was something else underneath them, something he didn't have a clean name for, which was the awareness that this was the line. Not the parking garage call, not the hotel on Capitol Hill, not the 40 minutes of overheard conversation. Those had been what happened to him. This was what he had done. The papers delivered to a house in Bellevue at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning were the line between before and after, and there was no before anymore. He picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down. He was still looking at the water when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Madison. He let it ring 3 times, 4. Then he answered. "Hey." His voice was even. "What did you do?" Her voice was not a question. It was a sound a person made when the floor disappeared. "I think you know what I did." Vincent, a sharp inhale. He could hear her sister in the background, a voice, urgent, and then Madison saying something clipped and short that made the voice stop. Then back to him. "You need to explain to me what the hell is happening right now." "You've been served with divorce papers," he said. "It's a standard filing. Victoria Sinclair's my attorney of record. Her contact information is on the cover sheet. Your attorney should reach out to her directly." Silence on the line. The specific silence of someone processing something their brain is refusing to accept. "You knew," Madison said, and her voice had changed, the shock burning off, something harder coming up underneath it. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "How long, Long enough to do this correctly," he said, "which is more than you were planning to give me." Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, controlled, the way a person's voice got when they stopped reacting and started calculating. "This is not how this was supposed to go," she said. "No," Vincent said, "it's not. You think you've—" She stopped, started again. "You think you've protected yourself. You think you've been smart about this. But you don't know what I know. You don't know what I have." "Tell me." "I know things about your business," Madison said. "Things that would be very interesting to very specific people if they came out in a discovery process. I have been in your life for 6 years, Vincent. I have heard things. I have seen things. And if you think I don't know how to use that, I think," Vincent said quietly, "that you should speak to a lawyer before you continue that sentence." A beat. "Don't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you good advice." He kept his voice completely level. "You're upset. That's understandable. But you're about to say things that could significantly complicate your legal position, and I'm genuinely telling you not to do that. Not as a tactic, as someone who—" He paused. Let the pause sit. "As someone who doesn't want this to be worse than it has to be." He heard her breathing, fast and shallow, the breathing of someone trying to contain something large. "Go home," he said. "Be with your sister today. Talk to a lawyer tomorrow." "Our home," she said, sharp. "I'm coming home." "It's still your home," he said. "I'm not asking you to leave. That's not how this works." "How magnanimous of you." He said nothing. 7 years, she said, and her voice cracked on it. Not grief for him, he knew that now, but grief for the plan, the life she'd constructed in her head, the version of the future she'd already been inhabiting while she was still sleeping in his bed. 7 years, and this is how you— 6 years, he said. It was 6 years, and I gave you all of them. The line went quiet. I'll see you tonight, he said. Drive carefully. He ended the call. He put the phone down on the desk. He breathed. Outside, the water was flat and gray and completely still, the kind of stillness that came before a weather change, before the system that had been building offshore finally made landfall, and everything you thought you knew about the sky turned out to be preparation. He had filed first. She had expected to control the timeline. She had expected to choose the moment, the conditions, the framing. She had expected to be the one with the plan while he was the one reacting. Instead, she was sitting in her sister's living room in Bellevue, holding papers she hadn't seen coming, and the attorney she'd been building her strategy around was on the other side of the line from her attorney now. And the financial picture she'd assumed she understood had already changed in ways Keating was going to spend the next 2 weeks discovering. Vincent Callahan looked at the water. For the first time since the parking garage, something in his chest unclenched, just slightly, just enough to notice. It wasn't victory. It was too early and too complicated to be victory. But it was the end of the part where he was waiting, and the beginning of the part where, for better or worse, there was no going back for either of them. His phone buzzed again. Not Madison this time. The name on the screen was one he didn't recognize, a 425 area code. Bellevue. He stared at it for a moment, then he answered, "Mr. Callahan?" The voice was a woman's, quiet, careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this call and was trying to stay inside the rehearsal. "My name is Rebecca Whitmore. I think we need to talk, and I think—" A pause. And in the pause he heard something that he recognized because he'd heard it in himself for the past 2 weeks. The sound of someone who has been sitting on a thing they can no longer sit on. "I think you need to hear some things about Bradley before this goes any further." Vincent was very still. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I was just thinking about you." Rebecca Whitmore's voice on the phone had the particular quality of someone who had been holding something in for a long time and had finally decided that holding it was more dangerous than letting it go. Vincent listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He sat at his desk in the South Lake Union office and watched the flat gray water of the lake below and let her talk. And what she said came out in the halting, non-linear way of a person who had rehearsed a version of this many times, but was discovering in the moment of actual delivery that the rehearsed version didn't quite fit the reality of saying it out loud to a stranger. Bradley had been having affairs for most of their marriage. She'd suspected it for years, confirmed it, the Portland woman, Lila Torres, about 8 months ago through a friend of a friend who hadn't understood what she was handing over. She had confronted Bradley. He had denied it, then admitted part of it, then reframed it, then apologized in the way of a man who was apologizing for getting caught rather than for what he'd done. She had stayed because of their daughter. She had stayed because of the house and the life and the calculus that people made when leaving cost more than they could immediately afford to pay. And then 4 months ago, she had started noticing the signs she already knew how to read, and she had understood that it was happening again. And the name she'd eventually put to it, through a mutual acquaintance who'd seen them at a restaurant in Capitol Hill, was Madison. "I want you to understand something," Rebecca said. Her voice had steadied by this point. "I'm not calling you because I want to hurt anyone. I'm calling you because I know what's been sold to your wife, and I know it isn't true, and I think she should know that before she throws away a marriage for something that doesn't exist." "What's been sold to her?" Vincent said. "Vincent, Bradley told her he was leaving me. He told her we were essentially separated, that the marriage was over except for the paperwork, that he was just waiting for the right moment for our daughter's sake." A pause, a sound that was almost a laugh but wasn't. "He told Lila Torres the same thing 4 years ago. He told a client of his named Serena Walsh the same thing 18 months ago. She's the one who filed the complaint with the firm, though you'll never find her name attached to it because the NDA is airtight." Vincent wrote the name Serena Walsh on the legal pad. "He is not leaving me," Rebecca said. "He has never intended to leave me. What Bradley does, what he has always done, is find women who are dissatisfied with their lives and offer them an alternative. He is extremely good at it. He is charming, and he is attentive, and he tells them exactly what they need to hear, and he gives them enough of the alternative to keep them invested. And then when things become inconvenient for him, he finds a reason that makes the ending their fault. And Madison, Vincent said, where is she in that timeline? Based on what I know, she's approaching the point where she becomes inconvenient. A pause. She's made demands of him, concrete ones, a timeline, a commitment. She told him she was filing for divorce. I know this because Bradley came home 3 weeks ago and he was rattled, which is unusual for him. And I asked him what happened, and he said a situation was becoming more complicated than he'd anticipated. Another pause. He didn't know that I knew who the situation was. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. Because you filed today, Rebecca said. And once that becomes real, once Madison understands that the divorce is actually happening, she's going to go to Bradley expecting him to show up. And he won't. And I'd rather she understand why before she spends the next year of her life waiting for something that was never real. That's generous, Vincent said. It's not generous, Rebecca said. It's tired. A long exhale. I'm tired of carrying this by myself. I'm tired of knowing what I know and watching everyone else not know it. That's all this is. He thanked her. He meant it in the specific, limited way he meant things now, accurately, without performance. He told her Victoria Sinclair might want to speak with her as a potential witness to Bradley's pattern of behavior, if she was willing. She said she'd consider it. She hung up. Vincent sat. He turned the legal pad around and looked at the name he'd written. Serena Walsh. He wrote Lila Torres beneath it. He wrote Rebecca Whitmore beneath that. He thought about what it meant that Bradley had done this before, that Madison was not, as Rebecca had said, special, was simply the most recent iteration of a thing Bradley had been running for years, a practice performance of availability and promise that he deployed on women who were ready to believe it because they needed to. He thought about Madison's voice in that kitchen. I want my life. I want to actually live it, the certainty in it, the genuine relief. She had not been lying about the misery. He believed that. 2 years of genuine unhappiness, of feeling unseen, of wanting something different. That part had been real. What had not been real was the destination she'd chosen for it. She had looked at Bradley Whitmore and seen the exit, and the exit had looked back at her and smiled and said, yes, exactly. Come this way. And she had not understood that she was not the first person he'd led down that particular corridor. He was not going to feel sorry for her. He told himself this in the specific way he'd been telling himself things for 2 weeks, firmly, without argument, as simple statement of position. He was not going to feel sorry for her. But there was something in him that registered the shape of it, the coming collision between what she believed and what was true, and registered it not with satisfaction, but with something quieter, something that acknowledged complexity without indulging it. He closed the legal pad. He had work to do. The work took up the next 4 days in the way that all necessary work did, consuming, detailed, oddly clarifying in the way that action always was compared to anticipation. Victoria and Keating's office exchanged initial documentation. Marcus provided the first round of financial disclosures, which were accurate and complete and represented a picture of Vincent's legitimate holdings that was substantial, but not the picture Madison and Keating had been anticipating. There were emails Vincent didn't read, and phone calls he let go to voicemail, and a text from Madison's sister Dana that said simply, "This is really sad," to which he did not respond. Madison came home the evening of the day she was served. He was in the kitchen, deliberately, having calculated that the kitchen was the correct space for this, the neutral domestic ground. And she came in through the front door, and he heard her stop in the entryway and then continue, her footsteps very deliberate on the hardwood. And she appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked like someone had taken something from her. That was the simple way to put it. The particular deflation that happened when a version of the future that had been very real in a person's mind was suddenly unavailable. A physical thing, a change in how someone held themselves in space. She looked at him. He looked back. "I need a drink," she said. "The cabinet's the same place it always was." She got herself a glass of wine. She stood at the counter and drank half of it before she said anything. "I had a plan," she said. Not to him exactly. To the room. "I know. You were supposed to—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "You were supposed to not know. That was the plan." "I know that too." She looked at him then, really looked, the careful surface of the last week stripped away, just the raw fact of her looking at him and him looking at her in a kitchen they'd shared for 6 years. "How long?" she said. "The call, 3 weeks ago." She absorbed this. He watched her do the math, running back over the 3 weeks, cataloging every dinner, every conversation. Every morning she'd woken up next to him and talked about the renovation, or Dana, or the weekend plans. Every moment she'd thought she was managing the situation. "The whole time," she said. "Yes. You just sat there. Every night. And yes." Something moved across her face that was not quite shame and not quite anger, but was in the territory of both. "That's—" She stopped, picked up her wine, put it down. "That's actually terrifying. I imagine it is." "Don't—" Her voice went sharp. "Don't do that. Don't be calm at me right now. Don't be measured. You're allowed to be angry, Vincent. I would prefer you be angry. I can work with angry." "I know you can," he said. "That's why I'm not." She stared at him. He looked back, and the thing between them in that moment was not hatred. He registered that with some surprise, the absence of hatred, but it was something that had the same temperature. The cold, specific recognition of two people who had been very close and were now on opposite sides of something with no middle. "Brad is going to—" she started. "Rebecca Whitmore called me today," Vincent said. The sentence landed. He watched it land. Madison's face went through several things in rapid succession, a sequence he didn't have precise words for but understood completely. The surface cracking, the calculation happening beneath, the specific fear of someone who has been operating on a set of assumptions and is suddenly, violently unsure which of those assumptions is still solid ground. "What did she say?" Madison said. Her voice had changed, smaller, stripped. "She told me about Lila Torres," Vincent said. "She told me about Serena Walsh. She told me about the pattern." He paused. "She told me that Bradley told her the marriage was essentially over when he started with you. The same thing he told Torres. The same thing he told Walsh." Madison set down her wine glass. Her hand was steady. He noted that. "She's lying," Madison said. "She's not. She's trying to—" "She's tired," Vincent said. Those were her words. "She's tired of carrying it alone. She called me because she wanted someone else to know what she knows." He paused. "She said you're approaching the point where you become inconvenient for him." Madison's eyes dropped to the countertop. He watched her. He watched the thing happening inside her. The private, internal collapse of a structure that had been load-bearing. He had seen this in men before. The specific moment when what someone had been certain of was removed, and the expression that followed was always the same. Not grief, not anger, but a kind of suspended blankness, the face of a person in the seconds between the fall and the landing. "He said he was leaving her," Madison said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know he did. He said the marriage was—" "I know what he said. He told me—" She stopped, pressed her hand flat on the counter. Her knuckles went white and then came back. "He told me I was the first person in years who—" She stopped herself. The silence in the kitchen was the loudest silence Vincent had experienced in a long time. "Call him," Vincent said. She looked up. "Call him right now," Vincent said. "I'll leave the room. Call him and tell him the papers were filed today and ask him when he's telling Rebecca. Ask him what the timeline looks like now that it's real." He held her eyes. "See what he says." Madison looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. He went into the study. He closed the door. He did not listen, did not put his ear to the door, did not activate any of the audio capture, simply stood at his desk and looked at the window and let her have the conversation in private, because whatever happened in that kitchen in the next 10 minutes was between her and the choice she'd made and the man she'd made it with, and he had done what he needed to do by giving her the information. He heard nothing through the closed door. He stood at the window for 7 minutes. Then the door opened. He turned. Madison stood in the doorway. She was not crying. He registered this, noted it. Her face was dry, and her expression was something he had never seen on her before, something that was past the crying stage, something that lived on the other side of a specific kind of devastation. "He said he needs time," she said. "He said it's complicated. He said he didn't realize I was actually going to—" She stopped. pressed her lips together. He said I moved too fast. Vincent said nothing. He said, Madison continued, and her voice was very controlled now, controlled in the way of someone who has decided that control is the only thing left available to them, that we should take a step back and let things settle before making any major decisions. The kitchen was visible behind her through the study doorway, the wine glass on the counter, the renovation dust still in the corners. I'm sorry, Vincent said. She looked at him sharply, a flinch, almost, like the words were a physical thing. Don't. I mean it. Don't mean it. Don't be... Her voice broke slightly, caught itself. Don't be kind to me right now. I can't... She put her hand on the door frame, steadied herself. I can't do that right now. He nodded. She went upstairs. He stood in his study and listened to her footsteps cross the ceiling, cross to the bedroom, and stop. He thought, this is not over. In fact, in the way that matters, the legal way, the practical way, the way that was going to consume the next several months of both their lives, it was barely beginning. Keating was going to regroup. Madison was going to regroup. The shock of today was going to metabolize into strategy, and the strategy was going to get difficult, and there were going to be moments ahead that made today look simple. He knew this. He also knew something he had not fully known before today, which was the specific texture of Madison's devastation. Not at losing him, not at the marriage ending, but at losing the exit she'd built, at discovering that the door she'd been moving toward had been a painted door all along. He knew this, and he held it without using it, without shaping it into anything, because some things deserved to just be what they were. He sat down. He opened his laptop. He had 3 emails from Victoria, 2 from Marcus, and 1 from Dario that said only, Portland is handled. Call when you can. He called Dario. The Harmon brothers, Dario said. They're out. Whatever conversation they were having with the feds, it's been resolved. We're clear. Good. Also, a pause. There's something you should know about Whitmore. Vincent's hand tightened on the phone. Barely. Tell me. One of our people ran into someone who works at his firm. Not intentionally. Social situation. The name came up in passing, and our guy knows enough to know the name was relevant, so he... Dario paused again, and in the pause, Vincent heard the particular hesitation of a man choosing how to deliver information he knows is going to change the temperature of a room. His firm is separating from him. It's not official yet, it hasn't been announced, but the internal decision was made last week. Something to do with the Walsh complaint. Apparently she's reconsidered the NDA, or someone has been speaking to her about reconsidering it. Vincent was very still. She's breaking the NDA, he said. She's considering it, but the firm isn't waiting to find out. They're moving quietly. 2 weeks, maybe 3, before it becomes public. Does Madison know this? How would Madison know this? Vincent thought about the phone call upstairs. He said he needs time. He said it's complicated. He thought about the specific way Bradley had told her she'd moved too fast. He knows the firm is separating from him, Vincent said slowly. He knows his income situation is about to change dramatically. He knows the Walsh complaint is moving again. He paused. He told Madison she moved too fast because he needs to manage his exposure right now. And Madison, a divorce proceeding, a discovery process, her as a witness to his character. Madison is a liability he can't afford. Dario was quiet for a moment. That tracks. He's not stepping back because she moved too fast, Vincent said. He's cutting her loose. He turned this over. She just doesn't know that yet. What do you want to do with this? Vincent looked at the wall. This was the moment. He understood it clearly, the hinge point, the place where the story could go in 2 directions. He had the information. He had the leverage. The most efficient thing, the strategically optimal thing, was to let Madison discover Bradley's unraveling on her own timeline, which would be soon enough, and in the meantime focus entirely on the legal and financial proceedings. But something stopped him from saying that. Not sentimentality. He was specific with himself about this. Not a residual softness toward Madison, not the ghost of 6 years pressing on the back of his throat. Something else. Something that was more about the person he was going to be after all of this than about the situation in front of him. Nothing, he said. We do nothing with it. Nothing? She'll find out when she finds out. That's not my job. A pause. My job is the divorce. My job is the organization. That's it. Dario absorbed this. Okay. Tell me about Portland. They spoke for 20 minutes about logistics, about the Harmon situation, about a shipment and a timeline, and three men whose names Vincent knew well and trusted conditionally, which was the only way he trusted anyone now. When he hung up, the house was quiet. He went to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water. He stood at the sink and drank it and looked out the window at the lake, dark now, just the lights of the far shore reflected in broken lines on the water. Upstairs, a door opened. Footsteps. The bathroom. Then back. Then something he hadn't heard in 3 weeks. Madison's voice, muffled by the ceiling and the walls and the particular cadence of someone who was not talking to him. He stood very still. He was not recording. He was not listening. He was simply standing in the kitchen with an empty glass, and through the ceiling he could hear the muffled rhythm of his wife's voice, and the rhythm of, it was not the rhythm of the parking garage call, not easy, not relaxed, not the voice of someone who felt safe and unhurried. It was the rhythm of someone pleading. He set the glass in the sink. He turned off the kitchen light. He sat in the living room in the dark and listened to the house settle around him, and thought about what it meant to be in a building with someone whose entire world had just revealed its foundation to be a fiction, and to be the person who, by accident and then by design, had been the instrument of that revelation. He thought about Victoria's words. People who are this controlled often don't give themselves time to process what's actually happened to them. He thought, she wasn't wrong. He thought about the parking garage, the 40 minutes, the sound of Madison's voice when she was certain he couldn't hear her. He is incapable of the kind of thing I've been doing. It's just not in him. He thought about how much of his life he had spent being the person who was incapable of certain things, how he had worn that as a point of pride, how he had taken it as confirmation that the choice he'd made, the deliberate willed decision to give Madison the part of himself he kept away from everything else, had been the right one. He had not been wrong about his own character. He had been wrong about hers. The muffled voice upstairs had gone quiet. The house was completely still. Vincent sat in the dark living room for a long time, not thinking about strategy, not thinking about Victoria or Marcus or the Harmon brothers or Portland, just sitting, just being in the specific weight of what this was, which was the end of something that had mattered to him, and acknowledging that, not performing acknowledgement, not processing it strategically, but simply letting it be the weight that it was. He did not cry. That was not a thing he did, or had done since a specific night when he was 19 years old that was unrelated to this and long settled. But he sat in the dark for a long time. And upstairs, at some point in the hour that followed, the muffled sound came again. Not a voice this time, but something smaller that moved through the ceiling and the walls and landed in the quiet living room with a particular clarity. Madison was crying. He sat with the sound of it. He did not go upstairs. And in the morning, when he came down to the kitchen and found her already there, pale, composed, coffee in hand, her armor rebuilt overnight into something that looked functional, if not quite solid, she looked at him across the kitchen and said, in a voice that had shed everything except the hard practical core of a person who understood they were now in a fight. "I've called Keating. We're meeting Friday. I want you to know that I'm going to fight this." Vincent poured himself coffee. "I know," he said. "I'm not going to make this easy." "I'm not expecting you to." She watched him. He watched her. The kitchen felt smaller than it ever had before. The renovation half finished, the new countertop still waiting for the grout Madison had spent a Tuesday morning choosing. The ordinary debris of a shared life that was no longer shared. "One thing," she said. He waited. "Bradley?" She said the name like it cost her something. "What Rebecca told you, is it—" She stopped. "Is it all true?" He looked at her directly. "Yes," he said. "It's all true." Something in her face moved and then went still. She nodded once. She picked up her coffee and walked out of the kitchen, and he heard the front door open and close, and then the sound of her car in the driveway, and then nothing. He stood alone in the kitchen. The renovation dust was still on the countertop. The grout samples were stacked in the corner where Pete Sorens had left them. The new tile, the one Madison had spent a morning choosing between two shades of white that looked identical to Vincent but apparently were not, was still in its boxes against the wall. He thought about what came next. Keating and Victoria. Discovery. depositions. The months of grinding legal work that converted a marriage into a transaction. He thought about Bradley Whitmore, somewhere in Medina, managing his exposure, calculating his losses, moving Madison to the column marked liability. He thought about Rebecca Whitmore's voice. I'm tired of carrying this by myself. He set down his coffee. He picked up his phone and called Victoria. She's fighting it, he said when she answered. Expected, Victoria said. Keating, Friday. Good. Let them come. A pause. How are you? He looked at the grout samples in the corner. Ready, he said. But even as he said it, even as the word came out clean and controlled and true, something beneath it shifted. Something he hadn't planned for. Because Dario called back 40 seconds after he hung up with Victoria, and Dario's voice had a quality it almost never had, which was urgency without management, the sound of a man who had just received information he didn't know how to contain. Vincent, Dario said. The Walsh situation. It's not just an NDA. Vincent went still. Tell me. She's not just talking to the firm, Dario said. She's talking to someone else. Someone who would have a very specific interest in your financial disclosures if they came out in the context of a divorce proceeding. A pause that felt like a held breath. She's been speaking to a federal investigator, has been for 3 weeks, and the investigator... Another pause. The investigator has been asking about you. The kitchen was very quiet. The grout samples sat in the corner. The renovation dust lay still on the countertop, and Vincent Callahan understood, in the complete and unambiguous way of a man who had spent his life reading moments of danger, that what had begun as a betrayal between a husband and a wife had just become something entirely different from a divorce. Vincent didn't move for 3 full seconds after Dario said it. 3 seconds in which the kitchen held its particular silence and the grout samples sat in their corner and the renovation dust lay undisturbed on the counter and the entire shape of what he'd been managing for the past 3 weeks rearranged itself into something with sharper edges and higher stakes and a completely different set of consequences attached to failure. Then he said, "Who's the investigator?" "We don't have a name yet. Federal, not state. That's confirmed. The source is someone inside the firm who doesn't know the full picture, but knows enough to know it's not a routine inquiry." Dario's voice was tight in the specific way it got when he was managing his own reaction in real time. The Walsh complaint gave them a door. Bradley Whitmore is the door, but the questions being asked... A pause. They're not about Bradley. They're about the financial disclosures. They're about whether a discovery process in a divorce proceeding could surface information relevant to an existing investigation. Dario paused again. Which means there's an existing investigation. Vincent's hand was steady on the phone. His jaw was tight. That was all. Just the jaw. Just the one involuntary tell that he'd never fully eliminated in 34 years. The physical signature of his mind processing threat. "How long has this been running?" he said. 3 weeks minimum. Possibly longer. 3 weeks. The same window in which he'd been quietly, carefully, completely legally restructuring his financial architecture with Marcus Treadwell. The same window in which Victoria had been preparing filings, and Garrett had been building intelligence on Bradley, and he had been, by his own rigorous assessment, doing everything correctly. The universe apparently had a sense of humor. "Get me everything you can on the investigator by tonight," he said. "I need Victoria on the phone in 1 hour. And I need Marcus in my office tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., before anyone else is in the building. Done." A pause. "Vincent?" "Yeah. This changes the calculus on the divorce proceedings." "I know." "If discovery opens up the wrong..." "I know, Dario. Not sharp, level." 1 hour. Victoria. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for exactly 15 seconds. He counted them, a habit from a long time ago, the deliberate imposition of structure on the moment right after the moment when everything shifted. 15 seconds in which he breathed and let the new shape of the situation settle into place and stopped trying to fit it into the old shape. Then he moved. He went to the study. He opened the locked drawer. He took out the leather notebook and opened it to a fresh page and began writing with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that the next 72 hours were going to determine the shape of the next several years. The situation had 2 distinct components that needed to be managed separately, or they would destroy each other. The first was the divorce. The second was the federal inquiry. The overlap between them, the discovery process, the financial disclosures, the deposition testimony, was the kill zone, the place where one problem became two problems, became a catastrophe. The objective was to keep the two components from touching. The divorce needed to move faster, not slower. Every additional week of proceedings was another week of exposure, another opportunity for the wrong document to surface in the wrong context. Victoria had been right about filing early. She needed to be right about closing fast, too, even if fast meant a settlement that cost him more than the ideal outcome. The federal inquiry needed to be identified and understood completely before he could determine whether it was an active threat or a fishing expedition that had attached itself to the Walsh complaint opportunistically. Fishing expeditions happened. Federal investigators looking for leverage used whatever doors they found, and not every door led to something real. He needed to know which kind of door this was before he decided how to respond to it. He was halfway through the page when his phone rang. Not Victoria, not Dario, Madison. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he answered. "Where are you?" he said. "Parking lot. Coffee shop on Capitol Hill." Her voice was different from this morning, stripped of the controlled hardness she'd rebuilt overnight, raw in a way that made him tighten his grip on the phone by a fraction. "He called me. Bradley. He wants to meet. Tonight. He said..." She stopped. "He said he wants to explain things in person." Vincent closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, opened them. "Don't," he said. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm not giving you permission. I'm telling you something you need to hear." He paused. "Bradley's firm is separating from him. There's a federal inquiry attached to a complaint from a former client. His professional situation is collapsing right now in real time, and you are a loose end in that collapse. He's not calling you to explain. He's calling you to manage you." Silence on the line. "How do you know about the firm?" she said. "I know things." Vincent, "How long have you known him?" he said. 7 months. I've been in this city for 14 years. I know people who know the inside of buildings you've never been in." He kept his voice even, factual. "Don't meet him tonight. Whatever he says to you, it's about protecting himself. That is the only thing Bradley Whitmore is doing right now." A long silence. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you're still my wife until the court says otherwise. And because whatever you think of me, I don't want to watch you walk into something avoidable." The silence that followed had a different texture, not hostile, not warm, something in between that he didn't try to name. "I'm meeting Keating Friday," she said finally. "I know. This doesn't change that. I know. She stopped. He heard her exhale, long and unsteady, the exhale of someone who had been holding themselves together with both hands for 24 hours. "I need you to know that I'm going to fight this." "I know you are." "Okay." A pause. "Okay." She hung up. He put the phone down on the desk. He looked at the wall. Then he picked up the phone again and called Victoria. She answered in 2 rings. "I need you to listen to something," he said, and told her about the federal inquiry in the same way he'd told her everything, precise, sequential, no editorializing. He told her about Walsh, about the investigator, about the 3-week timeline, and the questions about financial disclosures and discovery. Victoria listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for 4 seconds. He counted. "This is manageable," she said. "Tell me why." "Because a fishing expedition attached to a civil complaint is not an indictment. Because the restructuring Marcus completed was legal and documented and has legitimate business rationale attached to every element. Because discovery in a divorce proceeding is not the same as a federal subpoena, and anything surfaced in discovery has evidentiary rules attached to it that would make cross-use complicated." She paused. "The question is whether there's an existing investigation that predates the Walsh complaint. If there is, and if they've been looking at you specifically, then the divorce proceedings become a secondary problem. And if it predates, then we need a different kind of attorney in the room with us. Someone whose practice extends beyond family law." "I already have someone in mind," Vincent said. "Of course you do." Not sarcasm. Something more like the dry recognition of a person who was used to clients who had contingencies for their contingencies. "Get him briefed. Tomorrow, not the day after. 6 a.m. I'll be available. He spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone. He called a man named Arthur Reese, who was 61 years old and had spent 20 years as a federal prosecutor before crossing the floor in a career move that his former colleagues had found deeply annoying and his clients found deeply reassuring. Arthur charged $350 more per hour than Victoria and did not return calls after 7 p.m., both of which Vincent took as indicators of genuine self-respect. Arthur answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call, which meant the network was already talking. I heard something came up, Arthur said. How? This city is smaller than it looks. A pause. Tell me what you know. Vincent told him. Shorter this time. Arthur was a man who required less narrative and more data, the kind of mind that got impatient with context and wanted the specific weight-bearing facts arranged in order. When Vincent was done, Arthur said, "The Walsh NDA. Was it firm-issued or personal to Whitmore?" Firm-issued. Then if the firm is separating from him, the NDA enforcement responsibility moves to the firm, and the firm has a strong incentive right now to distance itself from everything Whitmore touched, including the Walsh settlement. He paused. They may actually want her to talk. It makes Whitmore the story instead of the firm, which puts the inquiry back on him, which is where they want it. Another pause. The question is whether your name came up in Walsh's conversations with Whitmore, professionally or personally. I've never met the woman. That's not the question. The question is whether Whitmore ever mentioned your name to her in a context that would be relevant to a financial inquiry. Lawyers talk, especially lawyers who are trying to impress people. If he was involved in any transaction that touched your organization, even peripherally, even as outside counsel on something minor, and if he mentioned it to Walsh, and if Walsh mentioned it to the investigator, he wasn't, Vincent said. Whitmore has no professional connection to me or my holdings. I didn't know he existed until 3 weeks ago. Then the connection runs through your wife. The sentence sat in the air. Madison, Vincent said. She's been in your life for 6 years. She was in a 7-month relationship with a man who is now under federal scrutiny. If the investigator is looking for a vector, she doesn't know anything. She doesn't need to know things to be a useful witness to an investigator who is trying to establish patterns. She knows the shape of your life. She knows the edges of your financial world. She's angry. She's in the middle of a contentious divorce proceeding, and she's just found out that the man she left you for was playing her. A long pause. An investigator looking for leverage could not design a better situation. Vincent sat with this. He sat with it for a long time. Because Arthur Reese had just described a scenario that Vincent had not, in 3 weeks of careful preparation and precise execution, fully anticipated. The scenario in which Madison, who had begun as the source of the problem and had been managed throughout as the legal and financial adversary in a divorce proceeding, became something else entirely. Became a liability, not because of what she knew, but because of what she could be made to believe she knew, by someone skilled at that kind of making. He thought about Madison's voice this morning. I'm going to fight this. He thought about Keating on Friday and whatever strategy they were building, and the way that strategy might look to a federal investigator who was already looking. He thought about a person who was hurt and angry and had just discovered that the exit she'd built her future around was a wall. What do I do? He said. Not a question he asked often, almost never. You get ahead of it, Arthur said. You don't wait for the inquiry to define the narrative. You define it. A pause. And you consider very carefully whether a contentious, extended divorce proceeding is in your interest right now. You're saying settle. I'm saying consider it, quickly. A clean settlement, fair to both parties, concluded fast. That's a married couple ending a marriage. That's unremarkable. A long, contentious proceeding with extensive discovery, depositions, public filings, financial disclosures. He let the sentence sit. That's a different kind of story. And right now, you don't want to be a story. Vincent thought about Victoria's face when he'd said fast, about Marcus's careful columns of numbers, about $4.2 million in a trust that Madison had no claim to, and Keating hadn't found yet. He thought about the other number, the number that a fair settlement would cost him, settled fast, in the next 2 weeks, before depositions and before discovery opened, and before a federal investigator could find a use for the proceedings. How much time do I have? He said. If the inquiry is 3 weeks old and running through the Walsh complaint, you have days, not weeks, before someone files something or issues something that changes the legal landscape. Arthur's voice was flat and factual and completely without drama. I'd say 72 hours before your options start narrowing. Vincent looked at the wall. 72 hours. He hung up and sat in the study until 6 p.m., then stood up, put on his jacket, and drove to Dario's apartment in Capitol Hill. Not calling ahead, just showing up the way he'd done a dozen times over the years when the conversation needed to happen in a room with no devices and no record. Dario answered the door in a gray t-shirt with a coffee in his hand and took one look at Vincent's face and stepped back to let him in without a word. They sat at Dario's kitchen table. No ceremony. Tell me the worst version, Vincent said. Dario set down his coffee. The investigator has been building a case on the Port of Tacoma shipments for 18 months. Not our shipments specifically, the port generally, a broad inquiry into cargo handling irregularities. Our name came up in that context about 6 months ago, flagged but not prioritized. When the Walsh complaint surfaced and Whitmore's name started appearing, someone connected the dots to the divorce and saw an opportunity to use the discovery process as an informal fishing mechanism. So it's not a direct investigation. It's not a direct investigation yet. Dario held his eyes. 6 months ago, we were a footnote. If Discovery opens up and puts our financial structure in front of a federal investigator who already has us on a list, we become a chapter. Yeah. Vincent was quiet. Outside Dario's window, Capitol Hill was doing its early evening thing. Voices from the street, the sound of a bar 2 blocks over, the specific urban noise of a neighborhood that had never once been quiet in its entire existence. The Tacoma shipments, Vincent said. The ones from 8 months ago, Harmon Brothers. All clean on paper. And in reality, Dario paused for exactly 1 beat too long. Dario, the Harmon brothers used a handler on the dock that we didn't vet as carefully as we should have. At the time, it was a judgment call. The timeline was tight, and the handler came recommended. We've since learned the handler has a history of... He stopped. The handler has been deposed in a separate proceeding, a civil matter in Oregon. His name is in that proceeding. If someone runs a string from that proceeding to the port to our shipment documentation, they get a thread. They get a thread. Vincent pressed his hand flat on the table, felt the grain of the wood under his palm, grounded himself in the physical specificity of the moment, the table, the room, the amber light of Dario's kitchen lamp, the coffee smell. Is there anything we can do about the handler? He said. He's not hostile, he's just documented. His testimony in the Oregon matter didn't touch us, it touched the Harmons. But if someone is already looking at us and they find him and they ask the right questions, he talks. He doesn't have reason not to. Vincent nodded slowly. He sat with the full weight of it. Not the weight of each piece individually, he'd been managing pieces for weeks, but the combined weight. The divorce, the inquiry, the handler, the Walsh situation, Madison, hurt and armed with Keating and moving toward depositions, Bradley Whitmore, cutting his losses, managing his own collapse, an accelerant in a situation that was already burning. All of it, converging. All of it, pulling toward the same point. He thought about what Arthur had said. You don't want to be a story. He had spent his entire adult life being very, very good at not being a story. He had moved through the world with a precision that kept him out of narratives, out of proceedings, out of the kind of visibility that invited the wrong attention. He had built something that worked because it was invisible, and he had protected that invisibility with everything he had, and it had held. And then one Tuesday afternoon in a parking garage, a pocket dial had started a chain of events that was now, 3 weeks later, threatening to pull every thread he'd spent 14 years weaving. He looked at Dario. I'm settling the divorce, he said. Fast. Whatever it costs, it's less than the alternative. Dario nodded. No argument. And the handler. I'll find him a reason, Dario said. A good one? Legal? Nothing that creates more exposure. Nothing that creates more exposure, Dario confirmed. And Whitmore. Vincent paused. He's going down. The firm, the inquiry, Walsh, that's already in motion. That's not ours to manage. But I want to know the moment it becomes public, the moment it breaks. Why? Vincent thought about Madison in that parking lot. Madison on the phone, raw and stripped. Madison saying, "I'm going to fight this with the last of her armor still on." Because when it breaks, he said, Madison is going to need to understand something. And I want to be the one who decides whether she hears it from me or from the news. Dario looked at him for a moment. That's not strategy. No, Vincent said, it's not. He drove home through the city at 9 p.m., the streets slick with a rain that had come in off the sound, the lights of downtown blurring on the wet asphalt in long orange and white streaks. He drove carefully, both hands on the wheel, not thinking about strategy for once, just driving, just existing inside the particular quiet of a man who has looked at the full scope of what he's facing and decided that looking at it was enough for tonight. He pulled into the driveway. The house lights were on. Kitchen, upstairs bedroom, the lamp in the living room that Madison always left on when she was home alone at night. He sat in the car for a moment looking at the lit windows. Then he went inside. She was in the living room, laptop open, a glass of wine beside her, the particular posture of someone who had been trying to work and hadn't quite been able to. She looked up when he came in. "We need to talk," he said. Something moved through her expression. A bracing, a gathering. Keating already, not about Keating. He sat down across from her. Not at the desk, on the couch, directly across, the way two people sat when they were done performing. "About settling this fast." She stared at him. "I'm listening," she said carefully. "There are reasons," he said, "that neither of us should want an extended discovery process right now. I can't tell you all of them, but they're real and they're serious, and the consequences of not moving fast on this aren't just bad for me. They would be bad for both of us." Madison's eyes narrowed. Not hostile, calculating. Reading him the way she'd always been good at reading him when she was paying real attention. "The federal thing," she said. His expression didn't change. "Brad mentioned something once," she said slowly, "about a contact of his at the port. Someone who'd come up in something. He said it was nothing, it was tangential." She paused. "He mentioned your name." The room went completely still. "What did he say?" Vincent said. His voice was very quiet. "He said," Madison pressed her lips together, "he said you were a name that came up, that he'd heard from this contact that some inquiry had, that your name was attached to something at the port. He said it probably wouldn't go anywhere." She looked at Vincent directly. "I didn't know what to do with that. I filed it. I thought—" She stopped. "I thought maybe I could use it as leverage if the divorce got difficult." The room was silent for a long time. Vincent looked at his wife. His wife looked back. Between them, on the coffee table, her wine glass caught the light from the living room lamp and held it in a small, steady circle. "Madison," he said. "Yeah." "Did you tell Keating?" She held his eyes. She did not answer right away. And in the silence of that non-answer, Vincent Callahan felt the floor move beneath him in a way that all the preparation and all the strategy and all the 72-hour windows in the world could not have fully prepared him for. Because this was not an abstract federal inquiry, and this was not a thread that someone might pull. This was his wife, sitting across from him in their living room, with information that could restructure everything, deciding in real time whether to use it as a weapon against him. The silence stretched between them like something physical, a thing with weight and dimension, occupying the space above the coffee table, above the wine glass catching the light, above the 6 years of shared living that had come down to this specific moment in this specific room. Vincent did not move. He had made a career out of not moving when the room required it, out of letting silences run until the other person filled them, because the person who filled a silence first was always the person who needed something. But this was different from every other silence he'd ever held, because this was Madison. And what she was deciding in the space of it was not a negotiation, but something that could not be undone once it was done. "Did you tell Keating?" he said again. Madison looked at him. Her hands were in her lap. Her wine glass was untouched. The laptop behind her had gone dark from inactivity, its screen giving up its light quietly, and the room was dimmer for it. "No," she said. He let out a breath through his nose, very slow, very quiet. "But you were going to," he said. She didn't answer right away. That was its own answer, and they both knew it, and she knew that he knew it, and the pretense of ambiguity lasted about 4 seconds before she let it go. I was considering it, she said, as leverage. If things got... She stopped. If things got bad enough. Things got bad enough, he said. You told me this morning you were going to fight. I know what I told you this morning. So what changed? She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at the dark laptop screen. Then she looked at her hands. He called again, she said. Brad, while you were out. A pause. He wanted to know what I knew about your finances. Specifically, he wanted to know if I had documentation or if I'd heard anything. He framed it as being concerned for me, for my settlement, but he was... She stopped, pressed her lips together. He was asking me to be his source, to feed him information that he could use somehow. I don't even know for what. For himself, clearly. For whatever situation he's in that I apparently don't fully understand. And you said? I said I didn't have anything. She looked up, which is true. What I have is one sentence that he said once 8 months ago that I don't even know the context of. She paused. But I'd written it down in a notebook. Because I write things down, I always have, and when the divorce started, I thought it was the kind of thing that might matter. Where's the notebook? Upstairs. I need you to give it to me, he said. She held his eyes. If I give you the notebook, she said slowly, what does that buy me? He felt something move through him at the question. Not anger, not contempt, something more complicated. Closer to respect, actually. The respect for someone who, having lost almost everything they'd wagered, was still thinking clearly enough to understand that they had one remaining chip and were not going to surrender it without knowing what they were getting in return. She was not a stupid woman. She had never been a stupid woman. He had loved her partly for that. A fair settlement, he said. What the law says you're entitled to. Victoria won't fight it, won't stretch it out, won't make it harder than it needs to be. You walk away with what's fair. And the hidden assets. There are no hidden assets, he said. There is a trust established by my grandfather before I was born that you have no legal claim to under Washington state law because it predates our marriage and you are not a named beneficiary. That's not hidden. That's separate. Your attorney can verify that in an afternoon. Madison absorbed this. So I was never going to get what I thought I was going to get, she said. No. Keating told you what he could see from the outside. He didn't have the full picture. Vincent kept his voice level. Not cruel, not satisfied. Just the facts laid flat between them. You made a plan based on incomplete information. That's not a character judgment. It's just what happened. She was quiet for a moment. A fair settlement, she said. Defined by who? By Washington state law. Victoria knows what that means. Your attorney knows what that means. We get an independent financial evaluation. We follow the law. We're done in 30 days. 30 days? Yes. She sat with this. He watched the calculation happening. Not the frantic, destabilized calculation of the past 24 hours, but something more careful. The calculation of a person who had removed the fantasy from the equation and was working only with what was real. And Brad's situation, she said, whatever's happening to him, the firm, the inquiry, that doesn't touch me. Why would it touch you? Because I was with him. Because people know. She looked at him. Because if his name becomes a story, mine will be attached to it. Not if we're already settled. Not if the divorce is done and there's no proceeding, no open case, nothing that connects your name to his professionally or legally. He paused. A closed case is a closed case. Nobody looks twice at a closed case. She sat with this for a long time. The house settled around them. The particular sounds of an old structure at night, the creak and sigh of wood and plaster, the distant sound of water somewhere, the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen, the ordinary life of a building that didn't know or care what was happening inside it. Madison got up. She went upstairs without a word. He sat where he was. She was gone for 4 minutes. He heard her overhead, the bedroom, the specific creak of the closet door, a drawer. Then footsteps back across the ceiling, down the stairs. She came into the living room and set a small notebook on the coffee table between them. Spiral-bound, dark green cover, the kind you could buy anywhere. She sat back down. The Brad entry is dated October 14th, she said. 3rd page. He picked up the notebook, found the page, read the entry. It was exactly what she'd described. One sentence, handwritten, the kind of notation a careful person made when something registered as potentially significant without yet knowing why. Whitmore mentioned V's name in context of port inquiry. Contact of his. Said probably nothing. He closed the notebook. "That's it," she said. "Yes." Is it bad?" What he knew. "He didn't know anything," Vincent said. "He heard a name in a context. That's all this is." He looked at her. "It's only dangerous if it's in a deposition." She nodded. He put the notebook in his jacket pocket. "I'll call Victoria tonight," he said. "She'll call Keating in the morning. We move toward a settlement evaluation this week." "Okay," Madison said. They sat for a moment in the quiet. Not comfortable, not warm, but not hostile either. Something past hostility. The exhausted, stripped-down quiet of two people who had been at war for 3 weeks and had just, without ceremony, decided to stop. "I'm sorry," Madison said. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the dark laptop screen, at some middle distance that held whatever she was trying to hold. Not for wanting out," she said. "I was unhappy. That part was real. I'm not apologizing for that. I know. For how I did it." She pressed her lips together. For how I talked about you, in that phone call, the things I said." He was quiet. "I heard all of it," he said. "Not as a wound, just as a fact." "I know you did." She closed her eyes briefly. "I know." He thought about what he wanted to say in this moment and discovered with some surprise that there was not very much. The things he could have said, the recriminations, the accounting of grievances, the specific catalog of what her words had cost him, sat somewhere in him without urgency. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but not in need of being said. "Go to sleep," he said. "It's been a long day." She looked at him then, directly for the first time tonight, without the armor of calculation or the defense of anger. Just looked at him. The way she'd looked at him a long time ago when they were new and she hadn't yet decided to be strategic about everything. "Yeah," she said. "It has." She picked up her wine glass, finished what was left, and went upstairs. He sat alone in the living room for a long time. He sat until the house was fully quiet and the street outside had gone to the particular hush of Seattle past midnight. The rain, the distant water, the low ambient breath of a city that was never entirely still. He sat and he let himself feel the full specific weight of the night, not managing it, not processing it toward any useful conclusion, just feeling it. It was the weight of something ending, not just the marriage. The marriage had ended in a parking garage 3 weeks ago, even if the paperwork hadn't known it yet. Something larger. The version of himself that had believed in the particular arrangement he'd built, the empire on one side, the private life on the other, the careful partition between them, that version was done. Whatever came next would not have the same architecture. He didn't know yet what the new architecture looked like. He was okay with not knowing. He turned off the living room lamp and went upstairs and slept in the guest room for the first time since this started, because some things were already over and it was better to be honest about that than to perform an intimacy that no longer existed. He slept without difficulty. He had always been good at that. The next 31 days were the hardest sustained work he had done in years, and none of it involved anything that would have looked from the outside like difficulty. Victoria and Keating moved fast. Victoria because Vincent had told her to, Keating because Madison had told him to, and both of them because two experienced attorneys who wanted to avoid a prolonged proceeding could, when properly motivated, move with impressive efficiency through the machinery of dissolution. The financial evaluation was conducted by an independent firm in Bellevue. The numbers came back clean, fair, and considerably less than Madison had been anticipating when she'd been anticipating 40% of an empire. What she received was her legal share of a marriage, substantial by ordinary measures and honest, which was what Vincent had promised. She received the house. He had not fought this. The house on Lake Washington had been her choice, had been built around her preferences, had been the home she'd made rather than the one he'd simply occupied. He'd found a furnished apartment in Belltown for the interim and had stood in the middle of it on the first night and felt, unexpectedly, not loss, but something closer to relief. The apartment had no renovation dust, no grout samples in the corner, no history embedded in the walls. It was just space. He found he could breathe differently in it. Arthur Reese spent 3 weeks working the federal inquiry from the other direction. Not defensively, not in the crouched posture of someone with something to hide, but aggressively and openly, establishing through documentation and direct engagement with the relevant federal office that the Port Inquiry's tangential connection to Vincent's organization was exactly that, tangential. The Harmon handler was located, interviewed, and found, as Arthur had assessed him, to be a man without particular loyalty to any narrative, which meant he could be offered a more convenient one, legally, through a deposition in the Oregon civil matter that established his relevant testimony and foreclosed the line of inquiry the federal investigators might have used. It was careful, expensive, and entirely legal. It worked. The Port Inquiry moved on to other names. Vincent's remained in a file somewhere, attached to a footnote that would probably never be read by anyone who mattered. This was the best outcome available, and he accepted it without celebration because celebration was for people who needed the validation of relief, and he needed neither. Bradley Whitmore's professional collapse, when it came, was both faster and more complete than even Dario had projected. It happened in the 4th week, on a Thursday, announced through a terse press statement from Whitmore, Keene, and Associates that described his departure as a mutual decision taken in the best interests of the firm's clients. It was the kind of statement that said everything by saying nothing, and anyone with working pattern recognition understood immediately what it meant. Serena Walsh had, in fact, broken the NDA, or more precisely, had engaged a new attorney who had identified a procedural flaw in the original settlement agreement that rendered the confidentiality clause unenforceable. The flaw had been real. Whether it had been there from the beginning or had been carefully excavated by her new counsel was a question whose answer didn't change anything. Lila Torres gave a statement to a legal industry publication 3 days later. The statement was 2 paragraphs long and described, in the flat, specific language of someone who had been waiting 4 years to use precise words, what Bradley Whitmore had done and how he had done it. Rebecca Whitmore filed for divorce the same week. Vincent learned all of this through Dario and through the ordinary mechanics of a story that had become public. The articles, the statements, the rapid social migration of a narrative from rumor to record. He read what was relevant and set the rest aside. Bradley Whitmore's fall was not his to manage or his to mourn. It was simply a thing that happened, the natural conclusion of a set of choices made by a person who had been very good for a very long time at not facing their consequences. Madison called him on a Friday evening, 12 days after the divorce was finalized. He was in the Belltown apartment eating leftover Vietnamese takeout at the kitchen counter, which was the kind of domestic detail that would have seemed incongruous to most people who knew him, and which he found, honestly, one of the more satisfying aspects of living alone. He answered because they had conducted their post-proceedings communication with a functional civility that he saw no reason to abandon now. "I saw the thing about Brad," she said. "Yeah. And the Torres woman, and—" a pause. "All of it." "Yeah. You knew it was coming." "I knew some of it," he said. "The rest, Rebecca knew more than I did. She'd been carrying it longer." A silence. "I keep thinking about what I almost did," Madison said, "with the notebook, with Keating." Another pause. "I was actually going to— But you didn't." "I almost did." "Almost is not did," he said. "A lot of people almost do a lot of things. What you do with the almost is the thing that matters." She was quiet for a moment. "That's surprisingly philosophical for you," she said. "Don't push it." A short sound that was almost a laugh, and wasn't quite, because they were past the place where almost laughter was straightforward, but it was there, and he noted it. "Are you okay?" she said. He considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "I'm getting there," he said. "Me too." A pause. "I think?" He put down his chopsticks. "Madison." "Yeah." "For what it's worth," he said. "I don't think what you wanted was wrong. Being unhappy and wanting something different. That's not wrong. The way you went about it—" He paused. "That's a different conversation. But wanting to live your actual life, that's not a character flaw." The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before it. Not strategic, not loaded. Just a person sitting with something that had been said directly to them and deciding what to do with it. "Thank you," she said finally, and her voice had the texture of someone who meant it without condition or complication. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen counter in the Belltown apartment and finished his dinner and listened to the rain that had started while they were talking. The particular Seattle rain that came in off the Sound on late December evenings, steady and soft and without drama. It was the 19th of December, 6 days before Christmas. The city outside his window was lit up in the way cities got at this time of year. The particular warmth of light against dark buildings, the string lights in the restaurant across the street, the slow movement of traffic on the wet asphalt below. He'd spent 17 Christmases in this city in various versions of his life, and he had never once found the holiday uncomplicated, but he had always found the city's relationship with December light to be genuinely beautiful. And standing at his window now, he found that he still did. He called Dario. "How's the Portland situation?" he said. "Clean. The Harmon arrangement is stable. New handler on the dock, properly vetted this time. Everything running correctly. The Tacoma exposure. Closed. Arthur's deposition filed, inquiry moved on." A pause. "We're clean, Vincent. Actually clean." "Good. How are you?" He looked at the city. "I've been worse," he said significantly. Dario made a sound that was the equivalent from him of a long considered response. "For what it's worth. You handled this better than—" He stopped. "Better than most would have. I had good people around me." "You did." A pause. "You do." He said goodnight and hung up and stood at the window for a while longer. He thought about the parking garage. Not with pain. The pain was still there, would probably always have a small presence in some corner of him the way all real damage did. Not loud, just resident, but with the particular clarity that came from distance. He thought about standing next to his car in that underground space with the phone pressed to his ear, listening to a life he'd built being discussed by people who had decided it was theirs to dismantle. And he thought about what he'd felt in that moment. He remembered the stillness. The very particular stillness of a person who has just learned something that changes everything and is deciding in real time who they are going to be about it. He had been that stillness. He had chosen it again and again over the past month, in kitchens and offices, in Dario's apartment and hotel lobbies and attorneys' offices, in all the rooms where the shape of the rest of his life was being negotiated. He had chosen stillness over reaction, precision over anger, the long view over the immediate satisfaction of making someone understand the specific dimensions of what they had done to him. He did not think this made him noble. He thought it made him himself. He thought about Victoria's observation, "You'll deal with the wound later. That's what they all say," and recognized that later had arrived in the way that later always did, without announcement, on an ordinary December evening over leftover takeout. The wound was there. He let himself look at it. 6 years. The decision to trust someone completely. The deliberate, willed vulnerability of giving the private part of himself over to another person and believing, choosing to believe, that the belief was warranted. He had not been naive. He had understood what people were capable of, had understood it better than most, and he had chosen anyway. That choosing was not a failure. The failure was Madison's, not his, and he was very precise with himself about this distinction because conflating the two was the thing that hollowed men out, the thing that turned a specific betrayal into a generalized conviction that trust was foolish and love was a liability, and everyone who had ever claimed otherwise was either lying or being lied to. He was not going to carry that. He had watched men carry that. He had seen what it did to them over time, the slow calcification, the progressive narrowing, until all that remained was the empire and the loneliness and the particular bitterness of someone who had decided that wanting things made you weak. He had watched his Uncle Dominic in the garden in Bellevue, tending his roses with the careful attention of a man who had run out of people to trust, and he had understood even then, too young to have the words for it, that the garden was not peace but consolation. The thing you turned to when you'd stopped believing in something larger. He was not going to be that. He was going to be something else. He didn't know exactly what yet. The new architecture of his life was still taking shape, still finding its load-bearing walls, still determining what it could carry and what it needed to let go. But the shape was there, emerging from the mess of the last month the way shapes always emerged from mess, slowly, through the process of subtraction, through the removal of what didn't belong until what remained was true. He turned from the window. He washed his takeout container, dried his hands, made a cup of coffee he didn't particularly need, and stood at the kitchen counter drinking it in the quiet apartment with the rain against the window. He thought about spring, not metaphorically, literally. The specific spring that came to Seattle in March and April, the way the city changed when the long gray lifted, the way the water looked on a clear morning when the mountains were visible to the east and the west simultaneously, the entire bowl of the geography revealing itself after months of cloud. He had always found that moment, the first morning after the gray broke, standing somewhere with a long view, to be the closest thing to restoration he knew how to access. He was going to stand somewhere with a long view in the spring. He was going to build something that lasted. Not from the rubble of what Madison had done, not from the ash of a marriage, not from anger or the need to prove something to anyone, from himself. From what he actually was, stripped of the story he'd been telling about his private life, stripped of the partition between the empire and the heart that had turned out to be more permeable than he'd constructed it to be. He was 34 years old. He had survived worse than this, and would likely survive worse than this again. And the survival was not the point. The point was what you built in the surviving. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Arthur Reese. Brief, professional, the man's characteristic economy. All clear. Final confirmation on inquiry status. You're not a story. Vincent looked at the message. He put the phone down. Outside, Seattle glittered in the rain, indifferent and beautiful, the lights of the waterfront throwing long reflections across the black surface of the Sound. A ferry was making the crossing to Bainbridge Island. He could see its lights from the window, steady and slow, moving through the dark water toward whatever was on the other side. He watched it until it was gone. Then he rinsed his coffee cup. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. In the morning, he would call Victoria and close the last open item on the divorce file. In the morning, he would call Marcus about the Bend property and a new opportunity in Portland that had come through legitimate channels and was worth examining carefully. In the morning, the city would still be here, and the water, and the mountains on a clear day. In the morning was enough. He closed his eyes. He slept. And outside, in the city that had been the whole backdrop of his adult life, the city he'd built something in, and lost something in, and survived something in, the rain continued its quiet, steady work, washing the streets clean, the way it always did, without judgment and without ceremony, simply doing what December rain in Seattle had always done, making room for whatever came next. Fade out.